All right. So, Ani Bojo, Stephanie Raklin Dejnikas, Ajijak Ndodam, Wanapting and Donjaba. I'm coming to you from Wanapate First Nation on the northern part of the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory. I'm the Use and Occupancy Analyst for Robinson-Huron Wawandama Gaywin. Next slide. So today I'm going to talk to you about our Use and Occupancy Mapping project, as well as our newest initiative, Mija Miigwechwendam, which is our treaty food strategy. Next slide. So I know we've been through the introduction of our organization. So the Robinson-Huron Wawandama Gaywin is a body that has been mandated to address many of our longstanding issues that face our treaty signatories. In accordance with the traditional worldview and our cooperative philosophy and reuniting our historical alliances of the 21 member First Nation. Next slide. So the RHW has a number of ongoing mapping initiatives to help us meet our mandated objectives. These will help us protect our Anishinaabe rights and interests on our homelands. It'll help us monitor the ecosystem within our treaty territories, clarify the use and occupancy of our treaty lands, and as Earl mentioned earlier, to assist with understanding our overlapping jurisdictions with some of our neighboring groups, and provide valuable evidence for our litigation, and eventually it could be used towards the development of a resource development policy for the treaty-wide. So we have brought on a GIS specialist and a GIS technician who we'll hear from after this presentation. And they'll be looking at things like recording place names, TEK, story mapping projects, and you'll hear more about that this afternoon. Next slide. The Robinson-Huron Wawandama Gaywin will be working with all of our member First Nations to conduct what is called Use and Occupancy Mapping, also known as UOM, in each of the First Nations. So this kind of mapping was created by Indigenous people in Canada about 5 decades ago. And since then, many hundreds of Indigenous communities around the world have done it. And the basic reason is to prove that our communities' homelands and traditional resources are vital to our nation's well-being. So we have a research working group that oversees the mapping project, provides guidance and support for our traditional ecological knowledge capture, identify methods to integrate our community knowledge, and to help with the methodology design and who can participate. So we actually meet monthly. Next slide. So use and occupancy mapping has been proven to be extremely valuable in asserting and protecting our rights. We believe undertaking a robust use and occupancy mapping program is foundational for supporting and fostering our treaty relationship. The primary objective of the UOM is to obtain a high quality baseline inventory of our map cultural and harvesting sites. And these need to be sufficiently comprehensive that it can be used successfully to represent our community's interests in a variety of contexts. This will include an intensive dialogue and transmission with our community members and administrations. So we have engaged Terry Tobias of Tobias and Associates to help guide and support our use and occupancy mapping program. And he's actually the one who written the book, Living Proof, a guide to use and occupancy mapping. So next slide. Cheryl did show the showcase map from Sagamuk. So in 2013, our project research director led a team, and they interviewed 115 Sagamuk members. Those members carefully mapped 23,000 sites where they had done trapping, fishing, hunting, where they've stayed out on the land. And this map shows 23,000 sites that the First Nation recorded. So through our project that we're undertaking now, we will be gathering data points for each of the 21 member nations and overlay them on a treaty-wide map. and that'll detail our current use of our territory. So much of the harvesting of interest will hopefully be recorded off reserve because that'll help demonstrate the full use of our territory. We will still be recording on reserve sites as well. It's just, it helps us to show, it'll help with the boundary issues more so. Next slide, please. So we have been very busy working on the design and methodology for our use in occupancy research, and it's nearly complete. We are right now in the research and design phase, which is foundational to develop our research survey questionnaire and help us design the most effective base maps that will be used for the interviews, as well as a guide that will have the research parameters, such as the areas, the species that are being harvested, the medicines, so what essentially we're going to be recording. We will begin testing our research methodology this winter. We are going to be interviewing 2 people from each of the 9 pilot communities to test the questionnaire. So that'll have 18 interviews altogether. And based on that methodology pretest, we'll be improving the base maps and the data collection manual that contains all the questionnaire and the instructors for the interviewers. So once the testing is complete, our team will make any necessary revisions for the base maps and the manual, and then we will begin our data collection blitz, and we're hoping to begin that in the winter or spring of 2022. Next slide. So the 9 pilot communities that have been included with phase 1 is Nipissing, Dokis, Wissahickon, Point Grandin, Atikomiksing, Magnetawan, Shawanaga, Henby Inlet, and Wanapitei. So these are the communities that have been invited to participate in phase 1, and the remainder will be in phase 2. Next slide, please. So the research design workshops were planned with the phase 1 communities. COVID did affect the project timelines somewhat, but our team is fully vaccinated and we're working with the communities according to their reopening plans. We're doing them individually. 7 of the 9 research design workshops have been completed to date. So what we're starting to do is build our list of our interviewees. So who can participate in the project. So if you're an Anishinaabe land user from the Robinson-Huron Treaty Territory, if you have direct personal harvesting experience, such as hunting, fishing, picking medicines, doing your maple syrup, we'd like to invite you to sign up for an interview. We really want to get this project out there because the more respondents we have, the stronger our maps will be. And they'll be able to, successfully fulfill the purpose of why we're doing that, which is to protect our territories. Next slide, please. So we continue to build and foster the culture of research in our communities. We want to get people excited to participate. So we've developed a number of promotional tools, our use and occupancy mapping brochure. We're working on a promo video with Sagamuk that kind of highlights the work that they've done. And of course, our magazine. So our next edition is being released, I believe, at the end of this month, or I think it's getting released like today. But we have made significant progress in the participation of our project, and that demonstrates growth in our culture of research in our communities. So we're committed to strengthening and furthering this momentum. Next slide. So as part of our brochure, we have a number of FAQs that we wanted to address. Why is this project needed? To provide each member nation a strong set of maps that proves where its members have done traditional activities on the homeland. Any nation that does not have maps is in a real disadvantage. At a serious negotiation or in court, whenever a corporation or government agency or even another Indigenous party wants to do something on or within the homelands of that First Nation, opposes. So when First Nation leadership has good quality maps to take to negotiations, the result is that the nation ends up with the bigger say about what happens in their homelands. Next slide, please. So how is the project being done? So each of the communities will select 50 to 100 members, depending on the size of the nation. So some of the larger communities will have more respondents. So we'd like to get the communities thinking about who their active harvesters are, who they'd like to put forward to come and do these interviews. It could be retired harvesters as long as they've done it in their lifetime. So each will do a private face-to-face interview with a trained interviewer. It could be between 1 and 3 hours, looking at maps and answering a list of questions, marking on maps where they've done various harvesting activities. This will all be collected into what is known as a map biography, which each respondent will get a copy of their own map biography. Next slide. So some of the communities have already done mapping projects. And unfortunately, because Indigenous people are overstudied, this can result in research burnout. We're always doing surveys all the time, and it's hard to get people to want to participate when the culture of research is so low. So we need to stress the importance of this solid methodology and one that can withstand the scrutiny of tough negotiations in court. Some of our all of our member communities were surveyed at the beginning of the project, and only one had maps that met the standard that we're trying to achieve, and that would be considered defendable. So having it done on the entire treaty area will support treaty-based governance and initiatives. Next slide. For those who do want to undertake an interview, there is some compensation. So participants will receive a $150 honorarium, and they'll also receive a copy of their own map biography. There will also be security features in place, so your information won't be shared outside of your nation and only for the purpose that your nation allows. Okay, next slide. Okay, so moving over to Mija Miigwetchuwendum, which is our treaty food strategy. This is a new initiative of the RHW, and it's aimed to research, understand, and reestablish traditional food systems. And we're requesting input into its design. Next slide. So as a strong nation, we need to be able to feed ourselves, our families, and our people. Colonization and intergenerational erasure of Anishinaabe knowledge has diminished our capacity and has resulted in widespread dependency on mainstream industrial food systems. So these external systems are vulnerable to the growing concern of climate change, transportation network disruptions, worker shortages. As we know, during the COVID pandemic, some of our farm workers weren't able to go to work, and that resulted in food shortages. We're also seeing an increase in contamination, such as food recalls and price market fluctuations. So the unpredictability and the availability and affordability is increasing. And as leaders, we need to plan to make those critical investments to ensure that our people will be self-reliant enough to withstand failure in those centralized systems. Next slide, please. So the RHW's Mija Miigwetchuwendum initiative will work towards reestablishing our local traditional food. We will be sending around a questionnaire to assess our current food harvesting issues, programs that exist, community needs, priorities, and areas of interest. Looking towards establishing a Mija Miigwetchuwendum community network or a working group. Research and gathering Anishinaabe food knowledge, and this will all be towards developing our treaty-wide food sovereignty strategy. So this may include initiatives in the future, like reestablishing our trade networks, providing market support to revitalize traditional food economies, culturally relevant nutritional programming, promote food as medicine and prevention, sharing harvesting protocols, and just making sure those resources are there for the next generations. Educating and awareness, providing support on zero food waste systems are all part of, could be all part of the strategy going forward. Next slide. So many of our member First Nations have already taken great strides to educate and support their communities in food security and sovereignty. So we're seeing an uptick in hunt camps happening on our traditional territories, medicine camps. It's great to see all the gardening that's been happening since the COVID pandemic. You know, we still have all of our families doing sugar bush. And of course, there's a lot of trade happening. So this is all already happening in our territory. Check out our article in the new edition of the RHW's magazine, and it features Niganing's food security group. We're also planning an upcoming series featuring food initiatives in RHT communities. So if you have ideas to share or would like to nominate somebody to be highlighted in our upcoming series, I'd be happy to get in touch. Next slide. Okay, and that's it for me. So if you have any questions or comments, like we said, if you have highlight ideas, or if you'd like to be interviewed for our use in occupancy mapping project, please get in touch at stephanie@wawindamagan.ca. Nahao miigwech.